The name of the model is Intensive Experiential-Dynamic Psychotherapy, or Psychotherapia Dinamit Χαβιατίτη Intensivit. And it has an integrative vocation. That means that it can incorporate techniques also coming from cognitive therapy or other models. The title today, inspired to the clinical case, is From Slavery to Freedom, Avadim Ainu. And the menu of today, I will start with some pills of history of the model, of the models, I should say, of the EDT family. The case will be also an example of the helping profession syndrome, a concept by David Malan that is more or less represents the professional risk of the helping professions, including psychotherapy. It is somewhat connected to Jung's concept of the wounded healer, Ametapela Patsua. Then we'll have a look at the main 9 ingredients of IEDP to the Israeli program for 2021, and we'll then go to the patient and the video demonstration. Sandor Ferenczi was probably the first outstanding theoretician and clinician who found how crucial it is to make room for emotional experience, and criticized Freud for instance, the free-floating association, which doesn't leave enough room and doesn't give enough attention to the highly emotional character of the analysand's communications. Also in that, on that year, more or less, Alfred Adler was the first who found that lying on a couch does not stimulate, that does not facilitate enough the emotional part, and he was the first to decide to sit in front of the patient. Reich, also in those years, he was, in my view, a fundamental also contributor who calls attention to the non-verbal part of the communication. Things like the voice, the demeanor. All this is very valuable, is absolutely necessary aspects to evaluate, to notice first, to give attention to if we want to get to the core, to the emotional core, if we want to elicit an affective, emotional response. Franz Alexander wrote the milestone book, Psychoanalytic Therapy, in which one of his most meaningful concepts is the corrective emotional experience. I like to call it corrective relational experience. And he talked about the intense re-experiencing of conflicting emotion in the transference, that is, the actual relation with an emotionally responsive therapist. So for Franz Alexander, the transference is mainly the real relationship. And here we have a look at the Tavistock Center in London, where David Malan worked, and Balint too, where, by the way, I trained, where in 1955, Michael Balint founded the Brief Psychotherapy Workshop. That was a group of gifted clinicians, and David Malan, the young David Malan, was one of them. Balint coined the famous phrase or definition of focal psychotherapy, which is supposed to mean that to keep therapy brief, we focus on a single psychodynamic conflict. David told me that they did never stick to a single psychodynamic focus. David, in the 60s, took on the Brief Psychotherapy Workshop, but instead of filling it with a gifted clinician, he filled it with gifted maybe, but younger therapists. David uses a plain, jargon-free language to explain what he calls the science of psychodynamics. And he can express very sophisticated concepts in very simple language. This is what made me fall in love with him before meeting him via his book, Individual Psychotherapy and the Science of Psychodynamics. I was privileged to take part in his Brief Psychotherapy Workshop, where he was very demanding, and each participant had to present a written summary of the main sequences of each session. And he wasn't happy if you put speculation in it. You had to talk about facts of what happened in the session. And here we have Malan's triangles. One is the triangle of self that has defenses, anxiety, harada, and the hidden feeling or impulse, dahaf, regesh, and the triangle of other or others, or the meaningful others. One of them hopefully is the therapist or metapel, and meaningful people from the current life, ove, meaningful people from past life, avar. And by putting here attachment and a few arrows, we can also highlight the attachment bond between the individual and his meaningful others. These three books, David wrote more, but this is just a picture, and very meaningful books on process and outcome of psychotherapy and brief psychotherapy especially, but not only. This is a book David and I wrote together about short-term psychotherapy and outcome of 24 consecutive cases by trainees with process and outcome data. So we tried via these follow-up interviews and the analysis of them to define the types of change that are most valued by the best results. Within these 24 cases, we had some highly successful ones, some very poor results, and a number of in between. But taking the best results and interviewing them, we understood that the most valued changes for these lucky people have been a sense of emotional freeing, being able to make use of their emotion, and being oneself. This is a hierarchy. So what follows is a resolution of maladaptive patterns. We could call them also character pathology. symptom improvement, like a phobia or depression, forming a good enough love relationship, and constructive self-assertion. The latter being the most widespread, in a way, the easiest to achieve, even with very difficult cases. In the 60s and 70s, Davanloo started applying the video recording to psychotherapy session in a systematic way. And that way, he was able to focus on the body and nonverbal communication, which led him to further develop Reich's focus on character analysis. Davanloo devised new techniques for dealing with what he called character defenses, and his main discovery, perhaps, no, one of, was about tactical defenses. Those defenses that go sometimes unnoticed because we don't necessarily pay attention if we are not trained to. If someone changes subject or looks away or rationalizes, I mean, there are a number of ready-made, disposable ways of avoiding the crucial emotional issues. Davanloo was able to demonstrate that it is possible to spot defenses and overcome resistance even in a single session, bringing about change even with some highly resistant character disturbances. When David met him, he was astonished and happy. What this man can do is incredible. I devoted my life to find out new and effective psychotherapy. This is the man I have been looking for. These are my words, of course. But this is something David really said. Freud discovered the unconscious and Davanloo discovered the way to use it therapeutically. So he became Davanloo's sponsor and started teaching Davanloo's IEDP at the Tavistock right when I was there. And also, David created the theoretical concepts to explain Davanloo's technical work and helped him write his books. This is a concept by Malan that we will discuss today because it's an aspect of the patient I show. And that's it. It happens that that therapists, which includes us, devote their lives to giving others the care and concern they would want for themselves. This gives rise to emotional suffering in the therapist, for instance, depression, accompanied by conscious resentment about the demands being made on him, her. I should add, demands being made on him from the patient, but also from the husband or the wife, or indeed the children. Now, the model, specifically the EDT model I use, is intensive experiential dynamic psychotherapy. Its main features are that we work, we base our psychotherapy work on the real relationship. We have 9 ingredients, especially, that we will go about. Emotional myotics is an attitude and a way of working, also technical, but also relational, that facilitates emotional experiencing, and the delivery of myotics is the art of the midwife, Meia Ledet. So it is a way of facilitating delivery of emotional experience, and about giving a pivoting around attachment theory and self-sabotage. The 9 IEDP ingredients are the real relationship, active mirroring, history taking and portraying specific moments of the history, anxiety regulation, work with defenses, emotional maiutics, superego restructuring or working with the inner saboteur, psychodynamic links, self-other restructuring. But we can also divide the 9 ingredients into 3 families. The more relational ones, so working with the real relationship is one of them, of course. Active mirroring means that I frequently mirror what I see, what I notice to the patient. So this enhances the connection and facilitates, catalyzes the relationship. And history taking, of course, is also relational, and focusing on a specific incident in the patient's life is relational, highly relational. The more dynamic ingredients are those related to the triangle of conflict or of self, therefore anxiety regulation, work with defenses, and emotional maiutics. And here we have a משולש של פעילויות חווייתיות דינמיות, the triangle of experiential dynamic activities that I wanted to have my triangle, so that's it, because the first one is the triangle of conflict or of self, and this new one is the triangle of the therapist, metapel, and all that it amounts to is to point out that we can decide to regulate our technical intervention based on what is on the forefront in the patient, in the signals that the patient is sending to us. So if on the forefront there is a defensive maneuver, we will respond with something to do with defenses, restructuring defenses, challenging defenses, validating defenses, work for the defense to be weakened or to crumble down. And if anxiety is on the forefront, we will regulate the anxiety. We will work with the anxiety. Peilut harada. If there is on the forefront an emotion that is surfacing, we will facilitate the emotional experience, and we will try to be like a good midwife must be to facilitate the emotional experience. Finally, the 3 more cognitive ingredients, the restructuring of self-sabotage or superego, psychodynamic links between, this is the triangle of others, so linking the therapist with current life, with past life, and self and other restructuring. This I owe it mostly to Lee McCullough, and it consists of helping the person to operationalize the change, to make the change effect of their lives. Some of this you can find in my book, and also in this book we wrote, especially with my former UK trainees, now all very valiant colleagues, and I wrote it with one of them, Mark Stein, and it is written by like 12 colleagues.